I'm still at it, learning React in 3 hours a week. To give you a bit more background, though, on me, the full-time job that I mentioned is that of being a mom and a housekeeper. So I'm actually educated as a computer engineer, and I've worked in a variety of fields and projects. So you may find allusions to different software, languages and whatnot throughout the podcast. It might sound a bit crazy, but it's been absolutely great to spend my Saturday mornings learning about React. Speaking as Thomas here, I can't disagree, right? It's always fun to learn new things like that. But yeah, we'll go back and enjoy Jane. Sorry, Jane, for interrupting. So while parenting has been, full of all sorts of joys and challenges that I hadn't expected, there's just something about the quiet, controlled world of software that breathes life into me. Plus, this new hobby gives my kids and husband a bit of mommy free time together, which seems to be fun for them as well. They actually made waffles, or wobbles, as my 2-year-old calls them, and delivered them to me. So cute and yummy, right? I mean, who doesn't want that? So anyhow, a quick recap on where we left off on my story. I had just kind of crashed my app in a blaze of fiery code while trying to use a vanilla JavaScript library with my new React app. Just sort of filling in some of the details here. If you missed that last episode, what Jane had done some web development before, and before when they did it, they're like, I can just find random JavaScript libraries on the internet and plop them into my program. And they should work, right? And so they wanted to, I forget what it was, a mapping application. And they're like, oh yeah, so they got this mapping application, JavaScript library, and they tried to integrate it into the React application and had this pretty, rude awakening to find out that you can't just plop an old school JavaScript library into your React program. That requires a lot of extra work. If you've ever tried, you have to create kind of like a bridge, and it just isn't something that somebody who's just learning React would, be really able to do very well. That's where Jane left off. Extremely, when I talked to Jane, very frustrated about this. Are you kidding me? Why can't I just do this? It should just work, that type of thing. And, you're kind of buried in this, learning experience, and there's a lot going on, and it can be frustrating, especially when you run into unexpected roadblocks like this. We'll go join Jane again, and Jane says, "Now what? I thought about just getting the marshmallows out and roasting them over the burning mess. Maybe I could look for a new 3-hour-a-week hobby, and I could just kind of put this into the tried that box." But then I thought about all the other thousands of people out there writing React code, and they do seem to be making apps that work. Maybe there's just some fundamental things that I'm just not getting about React. Have you ever reached a point in your work where you felt like you were missing a pretty big piece of the project? Yeah, Thomas here. I wanted to come in again and talk about this before we moved on, because I felt like it fit so well with what I was talking about in the intro, about it being about people. But this is in a totally different way, but I've totally been there too. So you're working on something and you're frustrated. You're like, oh, other people have done this. I should be able to do it too, right? And it's just this sort of motivation that sometimes gets you over that hump. It's just a fact that we are social creatures. That's what we are. And even though this might sound kind of silly, to me, I think it's really important and not something that you necessarily let control you. I think you can go too far in just trying to do what other people want you to do. But it's definitely a useful thing when you can keep it running in the back of your mind, like, oh yeah, other people have done this. There's no reason why I can't do this, right? So yeah, well, those are my thoughts on that. I think that was really interesting. We'll go join Jane here again. So jumping back into this, how do we find that missing piece of that puzzle, that thing that it feels like we're just not getting? Jane says with her kids, it's usually hiding under the couch. And as I thought back to when I, worked in software before the figurative couch seemed to rise before me, Stack Overflow, I found lots of puzzle pieces to weird problems there, like what magical CSS stew I needed to cook up to get my page to look right, or that I just need to use Internet Explorer to recreate that bug that my customer found. I thought about how to word my question, and as I did, word the question to try it out and find the answer on Stack Overflow, right? And as I did, I realized that I didn't have so much a question about how React works, but rather an incorrect understanding of how it relates to JavaScript and what problems React was designed to fix. Stack Overflow probably wasn't the right solution this time. So I decided to find another tutorial. I had already completed the, quote, incorrect React tutorial. It was now time to find the correct tutorial. So the incorrect tutorial was the default tutorial on reactjs.org or whatever the official React website is. It teaches you a lot of stuff that basically nobody does anymore in React, like class-based components, and didn't really do hooks or functional-based components, basically the past of React. And so Jane, not knowing this was the past, had gone through and done that, and I was like, it's still good to know, but it's just not really the way things are done anymore. And I think the direction even the React team is taking things, you're not going to be able to take advantage of a lot of new features if you program in this style. So yeah, that's how this got termed, that got termed the incorrect React tutorial. So now Jane set off to find the beta React docs, which I've talked about on the show before. Jane says, if anyone on the internet can answer my questions about the fundamentals of React, the docs provided by React itself should be the one, right? Last time I mentioned that I had found the React docs pretty easily and jumped right into them. However, the official front and center React docs are, as Thomas mentioned, a bit outdated. Finding the beta docs, though, was not easy for Jane. They're included in a little hyperlink at the top of the React docs page. But Jane says, after years, and I actually would jump in and agree with this, after years of scanning software blogs and Stack Overflow, I've developed this thing where my eyes automatically skip over anything that might be an advertisement. So think things like outlined in colorful boxes, larger, different font sizes, and small hyperlinks at the top of the bottom of the page that are often requests for donations. This has created issues in software as well as in the, real world. I'm always missing out on the listed specials on restaurant menus. When I get Christmas letters with pictures, my eyes skim right past the pics of people, and I finished reading wondering what picture they kept referring to. And when I go to a website to find a tutorial, the link looks just like a funding request. I don't even read the text. Have you ever run into that? I definitely have this. I have this exact same problem. And it's funny Jane mentions restaurant menus. I do the exact same thing. Like they'll put it, the specials in some sort of like colorful box or something. My eyes I just don't see it anymore. And I don't want to harp on this too much, but like going back to the human aspect of everything about software, I think this just ties in so well because it's this thing where we've, trained humans to alter their behavior. And this has an influence on software. So you just never know, how the human aspect is going to play into it. But anyways, so how did Jane find the docs? So she said she actually went back to Google and searched specifically for React Beta docs, which brought her to the right page. Also, very interesting, I think, from a human perspective. I think search, I haven't used Google in really a long time. DuckDuckGo, I guess, is what I've been on for quite a while now. But, search engines in general, I feel like, especially Google, but also somewhat DuckDuckGo, haven't been as useful as they used to be, probably because of content farms and all of this, So another aspect of this human behavior that really changes in how we interact with software. So anyways, Jane found the Beta React docs and says that the format of the beta docs is a bit different from other tutorials I've done in the past. First off, they're pretty long. It took me 3 weeks at 3 hours per day to get through the docs. That's a full work day. Yeah, I know. I went to school for 5 years to learn, software to some degree, but somehow a full day of work spent in a single tutorial seems a bit long. And yes, I did say 5 years of school. Calc 2 was a real cool killer. Set me back a bit in the prereq chain. I can totally identify with you there, Jane. I also, it's funny, I also had struggles with Calc 2. I don't know if it was just too boring for me or what, but I definitely had to take that one twice. I think that and one other class. But yeah, I get it. So Jane says, secondly, there's not just one app or project that you're working to make throughout the tutorial. There's a bunch of little sandboxes with snippets in them. It feels more like a class on React rather than the typical learn the software language with one simple app approach. To add to the class-like feel, there's little quizzes at the end of each page. The user can answer questions and code some little exercises to review the topic. So yeah, I just want to jump in again and talk about this next section. So I did an episode, called Concise-ish Beginner's Guide to Learning React. And in it, if you listen to it, you might remember that I really liked this. I called out and said I liked this sandbox approach to learning React. The more normal tutorial approach requires users know NPM and Git and command line interfaces and VS Code and a bunch of other tools. New developers, that they have to pick their text editor like VS Code, like I mentioned, and install it before they can even start to learn React, which is why in the beginner's guide to learning React, I said these sandboxes are great because you can start playing with React without having to understand how to set up this whole tool chain. Well, Jane, wanted to come in here and say that she actually, after going through the sandboxes, had a different opinion. She says, to be honest, she didn't really like the sandboxes. I found that I wasn't really learning. I was just kind of looking at the words and my mind was running through the list of messages that I needed to respond to and the pile of stuff that I needed to get done. My mind's just sort of wandering. With the build an app approach, I have to read and write the code myself, which forces my mind to engage more. It was also really hard to see how all the different things that I was learning work together. there were so many different sandboxes. And as I flipped to the next page, sometimes all the code in the sandbox was completely changed and I'd be working on a whole new project. On top of that, I didn't have a finished project that I could return to as a reference as I started to make my own app. So after I'd finished going through all this, I didn't really have anything to look back on. I don't have one of those memories some people have that just remember everything that, gets put into it. I might have a vague recollection that I read about how to update my state in a React app, but it takes me a few times before I can do it without referencing something. And a finished project also, Jane says, just gives her a sense of accomplishment. Like I can look at it and say, wow, I did a thing. I made a thing. This is so exciting. And this becomes really valuable when you're full-time engaged in a job like parenting that is never finished and doesn't provide timely assessments other than things like the meltdown that my child just had at the store, which left me feeling rather like I hadn't accomplished anything at all. So yeah, I'll come in again here and say I totally understand. And I think, if I was to revise that episode, I might make that more clear. I find the sandbox is really nice for that situation where you don't know how to set up all this other stuff. But once you get going and you get further along, a project-based approach is absolutely better for all these reasons that Jane mentioned. And if you're not a complete beginner, it's definitely a better place to start. I still think the sandboxes are super, super, super important if you don't have programming experience, because you get that instant feedback of like, wow, I made it do a thing. And I think maybe Jane is past that point and wasn't really reflecting on those feelings. But I know for me, when I'm learning something new, I don't necessarily even need a big project. Just like when I was learning programming, just the fact that I made the computer do something was exciting enough in of itself. And so I think these sandboxes are great for that type of thing.